When it comes to stories that have fundamentally shaken the fabric of the Marvel Universe, there are few that come to mind before House of M. Created by Brian Michael Bendis and Olivier Copiel, House of M is a story that's impact is still largely felt within the Marvel Universe today, particularly in the world of the X-Men and the universe's mutants. Released from June to November of 2005, it's a story that, alongside others published around this time, such as Avengers Disassembled and Civil War, ushered in the modern era of Marvel Comics and changed the way the entire company approached its storytelling. So in this video, I want to dive into the history behind this iconic story, explore how Marvel paved the way for this fascinating alternate world, and what the legacy of this comic book is some 15 years after its release, and how House of M continues to both influence and impact the wider Marvel universe. Before we continue though, just a quick reminder to leave a like on this video if you enjoy it, and subscribe to Owen Likes Comics so you don't miss out on any future videos. In order to understand the context of House of M's creation, it's first important to discuss its place within Marvel's wider stories at this time, as House of M serves as one piece of writer Brian Michael Bendis' larger arc within the company. As touched on in a previous video, Bendis took over the Avengers comic book in August of 2004 and began to rebuild Earth's mightiest heroes from the ground up in his own image, beginning with a 3-issue story titled Avengers Disassembled. In this, Bendis saw a series of seemingly random events tear the superhero team apart, from the deaths of Hawkeye and Ant-Man, a Kree armada invading New York, and Vision flying a Quinjet into the Avengers mansion and spawning a number of Ultron robots against the team. However, these events weren't as coincidental as they first appeared, with Disassemble's shocking conclusion revealing that these events were all orchestrated by the Scarlet Witch, exacting revenge on her former allies over the loss of her and Vision's children, which she had previously conjured up through magic. The Disassembled story concluded with Magneto arriving to take his daughter home, and as the Avengers were left to rebuild, the initial seeds were also planted for House of M. Following the end of Disassembled, Wanda's story continued on in the pages of Excalibur, with both Magneto and Charles Xavier attempting to aid the former hero, whose mental state had begun to seriously deteriorate. With Wanda's psyche failing to improve and her mind being one of the most dangerous in the entire Marvel universe, her brother Quicksilver begins to fear that the X-Men and the Avengers will attempt to kill her, and as such, he convinces Wanda to use her powers to remake reality, creating a new world where everyone's desires and wishes are fulfilled. As the Avengers and the X-Men arrive on Genosha to meet with Xavier and Magneto, a flash of light engulfs them all, as they suddenly find themselves waking up in a brand new world. Prior to House of M's launch in June of 2005, writer Brian Michael Bendis publicly claimed that the series would have long-term, serious ramifications on the Marvel Universe, later explaining that this 8-issue story was created to shake the world and break the internet wide open. And while many comic book creators often state similar when hyping up their big crossover event, once the first issue of House of M hit stands, it became clear that the Marvel Universe really wouldn't be the same again. House of M issue 2 opens up in this strange new world, as we see Captain America, now an elderly man, walking through the streets of New York. We learn that in this alternate reality, the fates of Marvel's various heroes are wildly different. Steve Rogers was never frozen in ice, Peter Parker is an international celebrity and married to Gwen Stacy, the Fantastic Four tragically died during their mission into outer space, and Wolverine wakes up next to Mystique aboard a S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. However, unlike the other heroes we've met previously, Wolverine instantly remembers the world before, with the events of the previous stories flashing right before his eyes. Through Wolverine's perspective, we learn the true nature of this alternate reality. In this world, mutants are the dominant species, whilst Homo sapiens live as second-class citizens, and the House of Magnus, led by Magneto and his children, rule over the world's mutant population. Logan escapes from the helicarrier and seeks out several different Marvel heroes, desperate to find another who also remembers the way things were before. He initially searches for Charles Xavier, breaking into his Westchester mansion, only to discover someone else living there, who has no idea who Xavier even is. Shaken, Logan searches for Tony Stark and Peter Parker before he's confronted by members of the Red Guard, an elite mutant task force led by Jessica Drew that Logan was once a part of, before managing to escape from them and make his way to finding Luke Cage and his underground human resistance, where he shockingly discovers that Hawkeye is alive and part of the team. Wolverine explains to Cage that this reality was constructed by the Scarlet Witch, theorising that Magneto took advantage of his daughter's mental state to create a world where mutants are no longer oppressed by humans. Cage interestingly reveals to Logan that only a day prior, a mysterious young girl approached him and told him the exact same thing, with Cage and the Resistance taking Logan to meet her as she introduces herself as Layla Miller. Logan realises that if his suspicions are correct and Magneto remade reality in a way that gave everyone what they wanted, that's precisely why he can remember, as he, in the real world, was never able to remember his past. Logan and the Resistance then begin tracking down various members of the Avengers and the X-Men, one by one waking them up to the reality of the world around them and recruiting them to their team. With a sizable and powerful force alongside them, the Resistance attack Magneto's tower on Genosha, as Layla, Doctor Strange, Emma Frost and Cloak search for Charles Xavier, only to discover a memorial garden with a gravestone for the former X-Man, inscribed with the message, "He died so Genosha could live." As the fight continues between the heroes and the House of Magnus, Doctor Strange discovers Wanda hiding with her children, as Strange attempts to empathise with Wanda to understand how and why she remade reality, with the Scarlet Witch revealing that it wasn't Magneto who coerced her into creating this new world, but instead her brother Quicksilver. However, as she attempts to explain to Strange exactly what's happened to Charles Xavier, Wanda is shot in the back with an arrow, as Hawkeye enters the room and begins to break down over the fact that in the real world, he was killed as a result of Wanda's actions. As this is going on, Magneto escapes from the battle and is confronted by Emma Frost and Layla Miller, where they reveal the truth to Magneto, who, realising that the world around him is a lie and he never truly achieved his dreams, lashes out on everyone around him and in his anger kills Quicksilver. Witnessing this, Wanda begins to break down, screaming at Magneto that mutants aren't gods but instead freaks, before uttering the now famous words, "No more mutants," as the world begins to fade white once again, as the House of M begins to vanish, and the world begins to reset back to normal, though with some small changes. As the heroes reawaken in their reality, the Avengers discover Hawkeye's costume pinned to a wall in Avengers Mansion, suggesting that Clint is somehow now once again alive. Meanwhile, the X-Men wake up to discover many of their fellow students have suddenly lost their mutant abilities, and Charles Xavier is still missing, as Emma Frost uses Cerebro to learn that through Wanda's actions, the world's mutant population has dropped from millions to barely a few hundred, and that the mutant race as we know it has been completely decimated. House of M is one of the most significant Marvel Comics events of all time, with the story's shocking conclusion massively changing the landscape of the Marvel Universe for many years after it. In the wake of House of M came a story called Decimation, which focused on the X-Men coming to terms with the loss of millions of mutants as they search for Charles Xavier, Magneto, Quicksilver, and the Scarlet Witch. The long-term ramifications of this status quo change was felt on the X-Men in particular for the best part of a decade, with the mutant ensemble ultimately seeing their status in the Marvel Universe diminish as the X-Mansion was destroyed and the team temporarily disbanded in 2007's Messiah Complex story, which led to Cyclops attempting to use the Phoenix Force to regenerate the mutant population in 2012's Avengers vs X-Men, with his actions ultimately driving Cyclops down a villainous path and resulting in the death of Charles Xavier. As such, basically from House of M onwards, the X-Men and the Marvel mutant population experienced nothing but pain and hardships, and it's only following Jonathan Hickman's recent arrival onto the X-Men series that the team has returned to their prominent position within the Marvel universe, which I think demonstrates just how significant and long-lasting the impact of House of M truly was. The fallout of House of M, particularly when discussing Decimation and the fate of the X-Men, wasn't necessarily something that writer Brian Michael Bendis intended when first pitching this series, instead a mandate given to him by Marvel's then editor-in-chief Joe Quesada. In an interview with Newsarama, Bendis explained his initial plan for House of M, stating that, "My plan was to present this sweeping story about wish fulfillment and all the things that you saw in it, but I did say to Marvel that this could also be a one-time chance to do things, an opportunity to really screw some shit up. We could never do this again. If we ever tried to do something this sweeping again, we'd be run out of town. This was a one-time chance, so I asked if there was anything we could put on the menu." Very quickly, the idea and motivation for Wanda came together, as did her relationships with her father and all the other mutants. It was all very organic, which was thrilling, because as Joe made clear, he'd wanted to do what was done to the mutant population forever, but it had to be done at the right time and in the right story. And while House of M's most notable impact was felt on the company's mutants, the story also had significant impacts behind the scenes at Marvel, forever changing the way they approach storytelling, seemingly ushering in the Event Age, which saw a greater focus on large-scale crossovers and major status quo changes in the years following House of M's release. Namely, within 2 years of the comic's conclusion, the Marvel Universe had been severely shaken up by other stories, such as Civil War, Decimation, and Secret Invasion. And with that in mind, it's hard to argue against Bendis' claim that House of M was a story that would massively change the fabric of the Marvel Universe, as there seems to be a clear divide between how the company told their stories before it and how they have in the years after it. And regardless of how you may feel about this approach to storytelling, which still remains a core part of Marvel Comics today, the impact of which this story had is unquestionable, and I think it's clear to say that now, some 15 years after its creation, House of M still remains one of the most significant and pivotal stories in the modern history of Marvel Comics. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like on the video and leave a comment down below as well. Let me know your thoughts on everything we talked about in today's video. I can't wait to hear what you have to say as always. If you're new to Owen Likes Comics, please consider hitting the subscribe button and the notify bell so you stay up to date with all of the new videos we release on the channel. And if you enjoyed this video, there should be some others on screen right now that you might also enjoy. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can go to patreon.com/OwenLikesComics, and if you want some more of me, you can follow me on Twitter, just at OwenLikesComics. Again, thank you all so much for watching this video, and I will see you next time. So until then, take care, and keep reading.